We're here to tell a story. It's about my life. It's mostly for my children. You know, you go through your life and you raise your kids and you think they know your story. The reality is they know little bits and pieces, but they probably don't know the whole thing. Hopefully they want to know the whole thing, and hopefully they can get some lessons from it, and hopefully they'll enjoy hearing some of the little parts of the stories that they might not have heard before. So that's why I'm here. I was born on January 29th, 1941 in the Bronx in New York, pretty close to Yankee Stadium. I didn't get to know the Bronx very well because when I was 6 months old, my father got a job with the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the U.S. Navy Yard in Brooklyn. So we moved to Brooklyn along with my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side and my mother's younger brother, who became very much a mentor for me. My father's name was Abraham Katell, and he was a brilliant, hard-working man. He went to school at City College in New York for 12 years at night to get his degree in mechanical engineering. But he was a real mechanical engineer. He literally could take anything apart and rebuild it. He used to drive motorcycles. He would take them down to the last screw and put them back together. So he was a brilliant man. And this was more a generational thing. He was somewhat aloof towards me. I wouldn't say that he was warm towards me. My mother, on the other hand, was as loving as you can possibly imagine. And I know I was the apple of her eye. I know I was the only child. We are coming into Brooklyn, where really my formative years, from 6 months old through the 3rd grade, right here in Brooklyn. You see where the trolley car used to run right in front of my apartment building. I used to come and deliver the coal into the basement furnaces. A few blocks away, PS 206, where I went to elementary school. I think we're in the neighborhood of the Brooklyn Navy Yard where my dad worked, where he was sent to Pacific to report for the Navy Yard on the atom bomb tests that were held in Bikini, which is pretty amazing. This is exciting to me, going back to where I lived from the time I was 6 months old till the time I was about 8 years old. Very, very exciting. This is where it all started. This is the Bronx Hospital where I was born. I think they fixed it up a little bit over the years, but this is where my life began. This is my grandmother's apartment right here, where my grandmother, my grandfather, my Uncle Allie, and I was living with my parents up on the 3rd floor. All of my sports interests, both in terms of the Yankees and other teams, and my active interest in sports myself, all came from my Uncle Allie, who really, as I say, was like my older brother. Now, Allie had been raised in the Bronx the first 10 years of his life, and so therefore, of course, he was a rabid New York Yankees fan. So, of course, I followed everything he said when it came to sports, including being a Yankee fan in Brooklyn.
We were from the Bronx, so we were legitimate Yankee fans. You can't knock us for that. I was a sports nut. I lived and died for sports. And I, of course, put that on Jerry's head.
My father, after the Brooklyn Navy Yard, he was able to buy his first house. And so here we are in Laurelton, Queens, where he bought that house for he and my mother and me. It was a very happy time with my mother and my father here, and having a house and helping him with put a lawn in and yard work. And my school, PS 176, is right up the street. So I was there in 3rd and 4th and 5th grades. And then somewhere during that period is when my mother got sick with Hodgkin's disease. I'll never forget when I was 11 years old, living in my grandmother's house in Brooklyn. And my father opened the door and came into my bedroom and told me that my mother had passed away, which just came out of the blue from nowhere. I will never, ever forget that moment. I had lost my mother, my best friend, my support, and I think it not only affected my life right then, but in many ways, the rest of my life.
She was driven and hungry for reading and learning new things. Even when she was terribly ill, she would read one book after another. And Jerry has that same drive that she had, and certainly the intelligence that she had. And she was the nicest person that I ever met. She was a people person, and Jerry's a people person.
I think that having had my mother and seeing the love that she exuded, I feel the same way. I love to live, I love to see the world, I love to meet new people, and I look for the best in everything. And I just believe that love is the most important thing there is. So her mother, who I was very, very close to, I wanted to stay there because that was comfortable. My dad didn't like that idea, so he brought me back to Queens. And there, he was off working, and I'd go to school, of course, and then I was alone for the rest of the day. This may have been part of the reason he decided to get married again fairly soon after my mother had passed away. He just didn't like the idea of me being home alone, so he married a woman that he knew from the company where he was working at the time, and so now I had a stepmother. Fairly soon thereafter, we moved. He bought a house in Wantagh, New York, where Jones Beach is, and I went 1 year to an intermediate school and then to a fairly brand new high school, Levittown Memorial High School, which turned out to be actually a really outstanding school. Here we are in Forest City in Wantagh, where I spent my teenage years. Here's the house that I lived in right here. All right, I'm gonna go walk up to my old house. So my dad built an additional room at the back of the house. He could build anything. So one of the great things about this house and the location in this neighborhood is that right across the street was this beautiful common area park that was part of the neighborhood with a lake and ball fields. That's where I was every afternoon, playing baseball, playing basketball, walking around the lake. High school for me was an amazing experience. First of all, Levittown Memorial High School was a fabulous high school. I had calculus and analytical geometry. I did very well. I was either on honor roll or high honor roll every single semester, but I didn't really want my name up on the boards because I wanted to be one of the guys. I wanted to be with the athletes. And I was a decent all-around athlete, but I didn't excel at anything. So I got 4 letters, basketball, tennis, but I usually didn't start. But that was most important to me, and the grades just came easily. This is Wantagh. So I spent my teenager years here, a lot of interesting summer jobs and all-year jobs. I sold greeting cards door to door. I worked in Jones Beach for 75 cents an hour, pouring coffee, making hamburgers. Worked as a soda jerk right here in Belmore, making the same amount of money. And I learned how to work hard. I learned self-reliance. That's my main takeaway was learning how to be self-reliant and making my own way in the world. The fact that my father did remarry, moved to a new location, new friends, new area, was, looking at it in hindsight, probably was the best thing for me. And having this location, having a park like this right across the street, having ball fields, really was pretty idyllic. In high school, I really didn't know what direction I was going to go. Where should I go? My father and his brothers were all engineers, different kinds. I went to my high school guidance counselor not knowing what to do. And so the guidance counselor said, well, you're really good at science and math, and the best school in the country for that is MIT. Well, I always had, when he said it was the best, if that's the best, I guess I want to go to the best. Now my dad's attitude was, you're not an engineer. You don't like to work in the shop and build things and make things like he did. What he really wanted me to do was do what he did, get some kind of job and go to school at night. That wasn't the way I wanted to go. I wanted to get my schooling and then go on from there. So I applied for it and I did get into MIT, and that's where I went. MIT was tough. I didn't have a hard time in high school. The grades came relatively easily. MIT, especially the freshman year, wow. I mean, there was a point they gave midterm grades, and they gave a midterm grade of an E because they didn't give Fs for midterm grades. And I got some Es. And literally, my fraternity house that I was living in, fortunately, from the very beginning, was on the other side of the river. And I remember crossing the bridge to go to MIT after I got the E's, thinking I should probably just jump in. I can't tell my dad. I cannot tell him this. Well, I managed to pull the grades up to straight B's. And then in the first semester, and the second semester, 3 B's and an A and a C. So again, held the straight B's. That was the minimum for the honor roll. And I never was off the honor roll the entire 4 years of MIT. When I arrived at MIT, the way it worked at that time, there was not enough on-campus housing for all the students, all the freshmen. And so Rush Week was before the freshman year started. So I had been in a high school fraternity and I loved it. So at MIT, I went around to the different fraternities, was asked to join Sigma Alpha Mu, joined it, and seniors and freshmen lived in the house. And the seniors were so supportive, especially during that freshman year, the toughest of the 4 years at MIT.
I met Jerry when we were both freshmen. We pledged the same fraternity, and so we got to know one another right away. We were roommates the second year. He was always striving to do well in whatever he did, and anything that he did, he wanted to stand out. That's what I remember.
So I picked civil engineering. I was in civil engineering, and my very close friend and roommate, Ed Lindy, was also in civil engineering with me. We both knew by the time we were sophomores that we weren't going to be engineers. We just were not cut out to be engineers, but we didn't know what it was we wanted to do. So for me, sophomore, junior year, I took a class in business law, and I just knocked it. I could tell you some of the cases right now and the arguments on both sides. And so my aha idea was, okay, I'm going to go to law school after MIT, and I'm going to be a lawyer specializing in construction. That was my idea. Okay. So I got accepted to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Columbia law schools, got full tuition scholarships at several of them. My dad, who by now had 3 other children, said to me, hey, I've helped you out a little bit at MIT. You're going to go to graduate school, you are on your own. I had worked the whole time at MIT. I was, both Ed Lindy and I were waiters at the faculty club, and I had summer jobs every year as well. After my senior year, I got a job. I had an interview at MIT and was flown down to Baltimore, Maryland in about March of my senior year to meet the president of the company where I was going to work for that summer, a man named Willard Hackerman. And he and I seemed to hit it off for whatever reason. And I told him I was going on to law school, and he said, you don't need to go to any law school, you just stay here. And he implied like my life was going to be set if I came to work for him. Well, one thing I didn't say to him that I had decided by that time, I decided all the way back, I think when I was 16, that I was born on the wrong coast and I needed to go to California. Now, the interesting thing is, okay, you could say, well, you knew from the movies you saw in your dad's films that he took, and you knew about the weather. Okay, so yes, I did know things, but I knew something else, and I have no idea, I'll never know how I knew this something else. The something else was, in California, the attitude was, if you had an idea or a new idea, you want to do something, it's fine, Jerry, go for it. Whereas the attitude in New York was, you know, we've always done it this way. No, no. And by the way, what family are you from? I don't know how I knew either one of those things at 16 years old, but I did. So as the conversation continued, and I said, no, I really want to get my schooling out of the way. I don't feel like it's complete. He then said to me, when he saw he couldn't convince me, well, if you insist on going to graduate school, don't go to law school, go to business school. I went back to MIT. It's March of my senior year. I've already, you know, all my plans are made. But I sat down and thought about what he said to me, and I thought, he's right. I don't like to be boxed into one thing. And so last minute, I took the business school boards, managed to get accepted to Harvard Business School and Stanford Business School, and had made my mind up. I'm going to go to business school instead of law school. So here I am in Boston in 1962. And you get into Harvard Business School at that time, the attitude was, well, of course you're going there. Well, but I get to Stanford Business School, and that was in California. So I had to make this decision. So I went to and asked for and had a meeting with one of the deans at Harvard Business School. And all I said to him was, I've been accepted to Harvard and Stanford Business Schools, I've got to make a decision. And he said to me, if I were you, I wouldn't make my decision based on the quality of the student body or the quality of the faculty. I think the schools are at a par. You should make your decision based on where you want to be for the next 2 years. He said that, and in very short order, I was in my 57 MGA, headed to California for the first time in my life. Here's where I arrived, to come to Stanford Business School, and it was beyond those dreams. It was beyond my imagination how fantastic it is. Look at it. Look at this campus. And here I was in heaven. So this building right behind me is where I spent my 2 years at the Graduate School of Business, Stanford University. Also where I met my wife, Linda, who was the assistant to the registrar. And this is where I had no business experience whatsoever. My family were engineers. There was no business know-how, no business talk, no investment in stocks. So all of that knowledge came from right here at Stanford Business School, and a class in real estate that ultimately led to my career in real estate. Okay, so here I am, my second year at Stanford Business School. I'm going to graduate in about 4 months. I had taken a course in real estate at MIT and a course in real estate here. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but there were no big companies in real estate at that time. So it looked like I was going to have to go to work for AT&T or General Dynamics or Boeing or some other big corporation. And I took a class in small business management in my second year. And a man came in and made a presentation about his company, Hexcel Products. I liked him so much that I decided I wanted to buy stock in his company. I went out to El Camino Real, found a brokerage company, bought the stock. But the important thing is the stockbroker referred me to the office next door where they told me about the Oceanic Properties subsidiary of Katell & Cook being formed in Hawaii. I went back to the business school, looked in Standard & Poor's, saw that Ernie Arbuckle, the dean of the business school, was a director of Katell & Cook. Marched up to his office, told him what I wanted to do. He set it up. I was flown to Hawaii and offered a job, and my career in real estate development started right then because of that. Okay, so what's the lesson from all this? The lesson is follow your dream. I had a dream to be a real estate developer. I just knew that's what I wanted. And there were a lot of little steps along the way and little breadcrumbs and pieces that I had to follow, but I never lost sight of that. Granted, it also takes luck. Yes, you have to follow your dream, but I also consider myself a very lucky person. I had a lot of lucky breaks and wonderful things that happened along the way. But part of it is I never lost sight of that dream and my passion for that dream. The story really came full circle in the early 2000s when I was asked to be on the Stanford Business School Advisory Council, which is probably one of the most amazing things that happened to me in my life. The Stanford Business School Advisory Council consists of CEOs of major U.S. companies, AT&T, Pfizer, and Robert Joss, who was the Dean of Stanford Business School at that time, and who was then planning to have the school build a new campus, asked me to join the advisory council, which is something I never even dreamed of being asked to do. And I think part of his reasoning was they were going to build a new campus and he needed somebody on the council who had the real estate development, design and construction background that I did as they entered into the project. And so this campus is the culmination of that work. First job in real estate was with Oceanic Properties in Honolulu. Obviously, first time I'd ever been there. And I was in charge, the company had massive projects. And I was charged with running the numbers. Now this was all on spreadsheets, not on computers. So it took, and these were 25-year projects. It would take 2 or 3 weeks to do one run. While I was living in Honolulu, I had almost no social life. I was broke, I was paying off my school debts, I was working at Oceanic during the day and teaching college algebra at the University of Hawaii at night, just to get out of my debt. So we were only there for a couple of more years because my boss was the chief financial officer. And I would tell him about the fact that most of these projects just didn't make financial sense. But he would never push hard enough. And the fellow who was the vice president of architecture and planning, his main objective in life was to get architectural awards for these wonderful projects, which he did, but they weren't making economic sense. And so I was very frustrated with that. And what happened was Oceanic hired a new man, Bob Linkler, to be head of West Coast operations. So he was hired, he came over and was talking to each of us. And when he talked to me, I said, I want to be honest with you, I'm planning to leave Oceanic. And he said, well, here's what I propose to you. You come with me to San Francisco, become assistant manager of West Coast operations. But then he said to me, if you still decide that you're going to leave Oceanic, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier for you to get a job from San Francisco than it is from Honolulu. And he was 100% right about that. And one of the things that he started working on was the acquisition of the Lake Arrowhead Development Company. And I was responsible for putting all the numbers together, and the plan was to acquire it, and then I would move there with my family and run the project. I was all ready to go, knew every inch of it, was very excited about that. But we had to get that through and approved by the Katell & Cook Board of Directors. So we had made arrangements to bring the directors to see the project, and I stacked my car with Arbuckle, the Dean of the Business School, and the Chairman of the Board and the President of Katell & Cook. And for better or for worse, I made a number of statements in the car about the Oceanic projects up to date and how they hadn't been money makers, and so this was going to really help turn it around. And apparently I wasn't very judicious in my statements, and they weren't well received. And Malcolm McNaughton, the president of Katell & Cook, said to me in the car, statements like those are not going to endear you to Oceanic management. Well, I didn't particularly want it to be endeared to Oceanic management. I thought they all should be thrown out, but I didn't say anything further. So now I'm 26 years old. What am I going to do? I called up John Lilly, my roommate who had ended up #1 in the class, and who had, by this time, gotten very heavily into the real estate development business. John set up a meeting for me in San Francisco with the CFO, Bob Halliday of Boise Cascade. They didn't have anything for me at that time. So, okay, nice try, Jerry. Within a month or so, I get a phone call from a man named Stuart Mullen in Seattle. Don't know anything about Seattle, never been to Seattle in my life. He tells me that he had a meeting, a YPO meeting, Young Presidents Organization. Now he had to explain to me what that was. Younger presidents of companies from all over the world who met once a month as a kind of a support group, almost like a fraternity of presidents. And that he was in the heavy construction business, but he had acquired a piece of industrial development property for an industrial project. He asked Bob Halliday who he should get, and Bob Halliday said, you should get this young 26-year-old guy, Jerry Katell, from Southern California, which to this day still amazes me. I met Bob Halliday once for dinner. I never run anything. I was a numbers guy. What a great opportunity. Seattle, 1967. I came up here to be president of my first company, 26 years old, Far West Capital Company. This was my first project, Seattle Distribution Center, 250,000 square feet. I had never built anything. I was with Oceanic Properties and I ran all the numbers on projects, some of which were being built, but I never built anything. I was a numbers guy, I had an MBA, that's it. I didn't have a clue, but I was ready to go. I knew I could put together and learn all the things I needed to do to make it happen, and I did it. First of all, I was going to build a very modern place. There weren't that many modern industrial facilities around, and I was going to charge, to make the deal pencil out, I had to charge pretty good rents. And initially, when I talked to the brokers, the industrial brokers, they said, what are you, crazy? You will never get those kind of rents. But I thought I would. I thought I was doing the right thing by building a modern 26-foot clear height facility, and people would want it. And turned out I was right, they weren't. And by the way, this is what led 12 years later to when I walked into Ray Watt and he knew I'd done industrial development and he needed somebody to run his whole industrial development group. This is what laid the groundwork for me to be able to say, yeah, sure, I want this guy. He's done a successful 250,000 square foot industrial development project. So standing here now, close to 50 years, 49 years since I built this place, and actually it gives me a thrill that it's all, look at it, it's fully occupied. There's people still doing their job, they're still using this place. So whatever my conception was in the beginning, to have this place designed and put together, it still stands the test of time almost 50 years later. I love that. I feel like I contributed something. This is my first house I ever owned. 13751 Southeast 20th Street in Bellevue. This is where I lived with Linda, and this is where I'm Pam, and this is where Andy and Jenny were born. Way back then. Good memories. The next step was to come to Los Angeles. And this came about because I had made an interim step to Simpson Timber Company, which is a privately held company that owned 500,000 acres of land in Washington State and Northern California, and had never developed anything. As part of being with that company, though, I had some trips to Los Angeles. I looked up a fraternity brother named Fred Kane, and Fred called me and said, there's a company here called Portable Parking Structures International that designs and builds parking structures, steel frame with precast concrete slabs bolted to the frame that can be used as a holding use for land. And they've had a number of projects and they need a new president. And so I actually brought in 2 investors, and I came and moved myself and wife and 3 children to Los Angeles to become president of Portable Parking Structures International, and ran that company for 6 years. We acquired a contract for a parking structure in Hartford, Connecticut. And there was a building in that site that needed to be moved before we could build it. They didn't move it. Long story short, we had put the entire net worth of the company into it at that point. We filed Chapter 11, and so I needed to find something again. I went up to see Arbuckle, and he was now chairman of the board of Wells Fargo Bank. He took the meeting. He wanted to hear my story. I told him my story, and I said, I want to get back into real estate development now. He said to me, Ray Watt, which is now the second time I'd heard that name, Ray Watt has just bought back the 50% of his company that he sold to Boise Cascade. Ray Watt is a member of the Wells Fargo REIT Board of Trustees and a big borrower from the bank. And so I will write him a letter, send him your resume, and tell him you're coming and you should meet with him. And so I walked out of there rather amazed that this had occurred. And I walk into Ray Watt's office in 1976. I was 35 years old. And he'd seen that I'd done the Seattle Distribution Center on my record. And he got the recommendation for Ernie Arbuckle. And so I became a partner, and the company was called W&K Company, Watt and Katell. One of the first things I did for Ray, he had acquired a property for his corporate headquarters building in the Santa Monica Business Park. After I joined Ray Watt, I came in to do industrial, but I built his office building for him, so then I moved into a new product category, was doing office buildings. This project was developed by Don Cole of Orange County, and he developed it as an industrial park. There were no office buildings in this entire Fox Hills, Culver City area. So it was, again, a big risk, but I felt, and the brokers felt, there was a market for office users here. So I had Herb Nadel design this office building, about 100,000 square feet.
Everyone knew who he was, and all the projects he did were very successful. I can't remember anyone saying a bad word about Jerry. I think more envy than anything negative. So I think that he was widely respected because he was so successful. He made deals where I think other people couldn't.
One of the things I really like about the way Herb Nadel designed this project is the central atrium. So the interiors of all the offices look out on this atrium. Here we are. This has been here since 1979, and it's just as gorgeous as the day we did it. After this project was up and fully leased and doing perfectly well and throwing off nice cash flow, after a number of years, Ray Watt came to me and said he wanted us to refinance this project. I was a little hesitant, but let him talk me into it. So we leveraged the project up. Then in the early 1990s, the Los Angeles economy really went into the tank. So the building lost a lot of the tenants that were here. The rents went down. Had we left the original loan on it, we could have made it through. We were feeding it and putting cash into it with a new higher loan. And finally, at one point, we just had to stop and we had to give the building back to the lenders. I wish I still owned it. I learned the lesson the very hard way that you better be careful about your leverage. And on the properties that I owned after that, I never let the leverage go up more than 50%. That was my takeaway from this project. But still, you have to learn two things. One, to be careful about what you're doing, and two, to bounce back after a failure. I worked with Ray Watt for 8 years as W&K Company. During that period, we did 3 million square feet of office and industrial parks and 2,200 units of condo conversion. Initially, when I was with Ray, he had me come to the management meetings, and he was, for the first 6 months or so, he was on top of every single thing I was doing. He would go out to my projects on Sundays when I was with my kids. And anyway, after 6 months, he was comfortable with me and he stopped doing that. And he was there for guidance if I needed, but basically he just let me run the show. end of the 8 years, we had kind of run out of all the capital that we'd created from the condo conversions. And so there was no new capital to do new projects. But it was a period where you could do joint ventures with savings and loan associations. Well, it didn't make any sense for me to do that still with Ray, and he knew that. And so I left and formed Katell Properties and started joint venturing with the savings and loan associations and doing the same kinds of things, industrials, office parks, office buildings, that I had been doing during the active years with Ray Watt. This was my first project as Katell Properties. I assembled 9 pieces of property along the freeway, 34 acres, keeping it quiet so nobody knew what I was doing in terms of making the assemblage. And then the major thing was getting the approval to build a project. What I naively didn't know was that the city of Agoura Hills had just been formed and included this property. And the reason they formed the city was to try and stop all development. So I had to work my way through the city council. Unfortunately, it took about 4 years to get the approval. There really ended up being little or no profit on the project, but it was the project that established Katell Properties and enabled me to move forward. One of the things that I did as a developer was I felt if you're building industrial buildings, they're tilt-up buildings, you can make them look somewhat nice, but basically they're not the world's most beautiful buildings. So I made the hallmark of all of my projects, whether they were office or industrial, the landscaping. And I would hire Robert Herrick Carter and other top landscape architects. Because really, over time, what you see in these projects, what attracts your eye is the landscaping. Beautiful trees, beautiful bushes that really make the project stand out. The buildings become, especially the industrial buildings, becomes less and less important. And I'm very proud to come back to these projects after 30, 40 years and see how beautiful they still look, at least in my eye, because of the beautiful landscaping that I put in 30 and 40 years ago. So this project for me, and as well as my other projects, really represented the dream and the passion of what I wanted to do. And fortunately for me, I learned that right at MIT as an undergraduate taking a class in real estate development, that I wanted to do real estate projects because, first of all, it involves pulling all the elements together. So you have to know something about architecture and engineering and civil engineering and construction and leasing and marketing and advertising. All of those things are involved in making a successful project. But even more than all of those things, what's involved is having a vision of what is it that the tenants want in the 2 or 3 years that it takes you from the time you first find the piece of property to where you put the building out for rent. What will the economy look like then? Will it be positive? Will there be people looking for space? And what kind of space will they be looking for? A 20,000 square foot building, 100,000 square foot building, 24-foot clear height, 36-foot clear height? How many parking spaces? What color? All of these elements to try and make it so that this Mr. Tenant, when he comes down, says, yes, I want to be in that building. Because that is the key right there. You could build a wonderful building, and if it sits empty, you're a failure. And people relationships, because that's part of it too. You could have all of those things, and then if you don't deal well with people, whether it's a lender, a broker, a mortgage banker, whoever, you have to be able to listen and to deal properly and to have a good reputation with these people if you want to be successful in business. We're standing at the intersection of DeSoto and Oxnard at the beginning of a project that I did called Warner Ridge. In 1996, I was called by Stan Machota. He called me and said that they were going to sell the 34-acre Warner Ridge project. They were going to put it out to public bid, but he was going to give me a 3-hour shot to decide whether I wanted to buy it before it went out on the market. So my wife Sharon and I came out, drove by the property because I'd never seen or heard of it, took a look at the property. It's a hillside, 34 acres, and then drove to Malibu to have brunch with my lawyer, Jay Shaffron, to talk about it. And I made the decision in that 3 hours to go ahead and make the acquisition. But in the meantime, a number of apartment developers came to me about buying this corner, said, well, you know, Jerry, really, the whole property should be apartments. There's a great demand for apartments. Well, that wasn't allowed in the zoning. So I started simultaneously going through to get the approval to build the rest of the project out as apartments. Long story short, they gave me the approval to build 453 apartment units. I got unanimous approval of the Planning Commission, unanimous approval of the City Council. In the meantime, all those apartment companies came after me and started making me huge offers to buy the property from me. At that time, I had lunch with a good friend of mine named Milt Swimmer, who was a partner with Jerry Snyder, major developer. And I had never met Jerry Snyder. So I'm telling this story at that lunch. And when I talk about the offers being made to me and gave the numbers, Jerry Snyder turns to me and says, "Don't be a schmuck, take the money." And I listened to him and I sold it and I took the money. It's the only time in my life I ever did something where I had a piece of land and then I didn't build it out myself. But it was the right decision. Project of my 45, 50 years of being a developer, I am most proud of this one. It's the only shopping center I did. It's the biggest risk by far that I ever took. And the project worked. I was attending neighborhood committee meetings and they said, "Mr. Katell, give us a shopping center like they have in the suburbs." The ones that were there, the smaller ones that were there, typically had barbed wire and walls around them. They said, "We don't want that. You give us a shopping center like they had in the suburbs." And I said, "Fine." And I put in my usual nice landscaping. And so then we were going to have a coffee shop, and they were Pete's Coffee and Coffee Bean were all ready to go. And they said, "We don't want those. We want a Starbucks." Not because they felt the coffee was any better, but because there was no Starbucks for 10 miles. And they thought, that will show the world we're a place to be. And so fortunately, Magic Johnson came in at that time, made a deal with Starbucks to bring them into the inner cities. We made the connection with him, and we had the opening of Starbucks. Now, the opening of a Starbucks is the world's biggest non-event. We had the LA Times, the New York Times, CNN. They were all there for the opening of this Starbucks. And the interesting thing is, this project was completed in 2002. I have never seen graffiti in this project or any kind of vandalism ever. I think the neighborhood has said to, whoever does that sort of thing, gangs or whoever, don't stay away from this. This is ours. It's always stayed this way and it's always stayed. Some of these tenants are the same tenants that I put in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I ran Katell Properties for 20 years. One of the reasons that I believe we were successful was that we had a reputation of being good for our word and honest and ethical. And as a result, real estate brokers would bring me land opportunities, prospective tenants. Now, it wasn't that they didn't bring them to other people. Of course, they had to. But we got to see things first. Well, why was this? Because we never played any games. They were used to games being played. They knew they would never see anything like that with me. But the same was true of planning commissions and city councils that I'd worked with over the years. They knew that I wasn't BSing them, that when I said something, I meant it. It always comes back to people. And I've had the most wonderful people, super smart, creative, ethical people working for me over the years.
As a leader, he was very good. He would delegate something to you and he would then leave it up to you to work it out and work through it.
I think Jerry's strengths are his analytical ability. He can look at a deal, and as a real estate developer, you have to work with a lot of people. He worked well with architects, he worked well with real estate brokers, with lenders, but he was willing to take risk. You cannot be a real estate developer without taking risk. And I think Jerry, excelled on all those levels.
while I was in business school, Linda, who was the assistant to the registrar of Stanford Business School, I asked her to marry me, and she agreed. And she had her 4-year-old daughter, Pam, who I adopted.
My first memories of him, he was 23 maybe, living in an apartment with his frat brothers or whatever they were from Stanford. I was with my mom, and I remember sitting on the floor eating Jiffy Pop popcorn. I don't know, for some reason I feel like I was watching some Disney show on TV, so they obviously were having a date with a child. And then I remember liking him a lot, and I was really happy when my mom married him. I was 4, and I know, or the story I was told is that the day after they got married, he legally adopted me.
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of my dad's kids, and we were always very close growing up, and I always adored my dad. I was daddy's little girl, and as an adult, I treasure our relationship. We're very close. We spend a lot of time together, and we travel together a lot, and I love the trips that we've done. We've been to China for the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and then we just recently went to Israel together. So I still admire and look up to my dad. We're still very close, and it's just been a constant in my life that he's always made me feel good about myself, and has just always been my biggest champion and supporter.
That's one of the highlights of our time together, is these river rafting trips we went on all over the world, which were just incredible. We started in Alaska, we've done this one in the middle of nowhere in China, and down in Chile, and I could see how special they were, and he always enjoyed that time together, and so did I, but not as much as I do now, and realize it now how special it was.
I don't think there's anything he would say no to as far as helping one of his children. It doesn't matter what the circumstance was. And that gives a person a tremendous amount of comfort and stability in their life to know that there's a parent there that will be there for you, regardless of what might transpire in life.
He always has time to listen. He always has very sound advice, and he's very accepting and forgiving. It is evident that in any crisis, he will be there for you, no matter what.
He's a cheerleader for the people he loves, and he'll always sing the praises of his kids and of other people in his life that he admires, and I love that about him. He's the best dad.
When I was 48, I was about to graduate from YPO. I went to a meeting and I met a fellow, Louis Strike from Cincinnati. He introduced me to the love of my life. I had been single for a little while when I met Sharon, and I'd been out on blind dates, and I was kind of tired of the whole blind dating thing. And here, Louis Strike, who I didn't know that well, sets me up with somebody who lives in Cincinnati. And so when I'm walking up the door to meet her on our first blind date, I did not have high expectations. I was wondering why I was even there. And she opened the door, and I was smitten instantly. And I called Louis the next morning, and I said, Louis, she's way over my head. I can't imagine she'd be interested in me. And he said, she's having dinner with you again tonight, right? And I said, yes. He said, she's a big girl. If she wasn't interested in you, she wouldn't be going out with you again. And I guess he was right, because we fell madly in love. We were married within 8 months, even with her living in Cincinnati and me being in Los Angeles.
It was a fantastic partnership, and I think they really appreciated one another so much. They were interested in the same things and created this really happy life with one another.
You know, when you meet people, you know if it's right or wrong. And Jerry, when he met Sharon, I knew the first day that Sharon was the perfect mate for Jerry. And Sharon had a lot of the same qualities Jerry did about living life and being adventuresome. And one of the finest people I've ever met.
We were at another YPO event, and he said, I want you to see the woman I'm going to marry. He said, she's absolutely beautiful and she's wonderful. So he showed me a picture of Sharon. And she was a terrific woman, perfect for him.
She had $1 million smile, always smiling. She would light up any room she came into. And I felt that when we were together, we created a new entity. We were both decent people in our own rights, but we created this new entity, and we walked into a room, you could feel something.
She was perfect. My wife and I loved Sharon. She was smart. She was caring. She was perfect in every way.
They were madly in love, and they were adorable together. Just a beautiful couple.
Sharon was world-class beautiful, but I don't mean just on the outside. She was world-class beautiful on the inside. She related to and listened to people and mentored people. And when she talked to you, she would listen. She wasn't wandering around. She wasn't thinking about the next thing. She wanted to hear your story. She was straightforward, interesting, deep. And we just had this incredible relationship, even though we came from very, very different backgrounds. We couldn't have been more connected. And the way I describe our marriage is that it started off fabulously and got better and better and better and deeper and deeper and deeper.
She was beautiful, she was smart, she was extremely kind and loving. And you can imagine having a little sister 4.5 years younger, and you're a teenager, and she and her girlfriends would be getting ready to go somewhere. And she would say, come on and go with us. And of course, they would roll their eyes and say, you're taking your little sister? She said, yeah, I am. And that's the kind of big sister she was.
Sharon was generous in every aspect that you could imagine a person could be generous. Not just financially, not just in devoting time, but in every interaction she had with everyone she knew. She was the most open and generous person that I've ever known.
After we came back from a trip to Northern California in the 90s, she started having stomach problems and sometimes writhing in pain. And I sent her to the best doctors I could possibly find at UCLA, St. John's, Cedars-Sinai. And unfortunately, they all misdiagnosed her. To some extent, I could understand why, because she always looked great. Even when she was going through that, she just looked great and acted wonderful. That's still no excuse. They should have been able to diagnose it. And we didn't discover it until they finally went in and discovered that she had colon cancer. And for a period of time, we thought, through a combination of various chemotherapies, that it could be handled. She, of course, had the same attitude that she always had through her life. Don't worry about it, Jerry. This is just a bump in the road. We're going to get through this. And that was certainly the hope, but it didn't happen. She died in May 1999.
From the time I was a little girl, my mother and I were always sort of two people against the world, I would say. There were many years she and I were just the two of us. She was not married, and when I was young, I thought, what would ever happen to me if she were gone? And I feel so lucky, so blessed that when faced with the actual loss of my mother, that he was there, and he's been there ever since.
When I met and married Sharon, I felt like I had regained the feelings that I had lost when I lost my mother. And when I lost her, it was like losing both of them all over again. But life goes on, and the way I have learned to live with it in both cases is I was so fortunate to have my mother for 11 years and to have Sharon for 8 years. Most people don't have somebody in their, one person in their life like either of them, and I was fortunate to have both of them. And that love that I expressed will live in my heart forever. After losing my Sharon, I started throwing myself into a lot of things that I might not have otherwise done. For example, I ran marathons. I had run 10Ks before, but never a marathon. But in addition to that, I went to acting school for 4 years. Now, my dad had started acting very late in life, and he had a fabulous singing voice. And having been in Los Angeles for a number of years, I did know quite a few people in the entertainment business. And so over the years, that led me to some of the parts that I was fortunate to receive.
B marks. What in hell? Fire!
Cut. One of the dreams Sharon and I had, I had taken her to Italy right after we were married, because I had been there once and fallen in love with it, and I felt she would too, and she did. And so one of our dreams was to try out living in Italy. And so after she passed away, a friend of mine said, you know, you both had the dream of living in Italy. You should go. Now that you sold your real estate, you should go. And so I did go, and I thought I was going for 6 months, and then ended up staying 2 years because I loved it so much. The other thing that happened while I was living and traveling there was I got much more serious about my photography. I'd been a photographer since high school, but it was mostly pictures of my family. And as a matter of fact, my daughter Jennifer curated the first show of photography that I had after my first 6 months in Rome, called Ti Amo Italia. We had it here in Los Angeles, and then we had the same show in Rome as well. And I had some of my Roman friends look at my pictures of piazzas in Rome saying, I've been through that piazza my whole life, but I never saw it the way you do, which was really, really nice. And it's been an incredible treasure to travel to all the places that I've gone to and meet the wonderful people I've met, and to capture all of it in my photography. In addition to acting, I've always been a dancer. In fact, in high school, I went with my class on the New York City version of American Bandstand. But I always wanted to become a singer. When I was 50, I went to my first singing lesson. I sang Desperado, maybe not the best choice because it's a pretty difficult song. So the teacher played the cassette of Desperado and then asked me to do a few other things, then looked at me straight in the eyes and said, I can't do anything for you. So I didn't sing. I stopped singing. That same year is when I met Sharon. I never sang for her, unfortunately. After she passed away, when I was living in Rome, I was hanging around with some musicians there. I mentioned about the interest in singing. They said, oh, you should go see the singing coach over in the next piazza, which I did. I told her that story. She said, I don't know why anybody would say that to you. You need training, but you start off with a really good voice. So I took some lessons there. When I moved back to Los Angeles, I took some more lessons, and then 5 years ago at a party in Sun Valley, I met Joseph Italia, who became my singing coach and changed my whole life because now I've become a singer. Maybe it's much too early in the game.
Ah, but I thought I'd ask you just the same.
What are you doing New Year's Eve?
Wonder whose arms will hold you good and tight.
When it's exactly 12 o'clock that night.
Welcoming in the new year.
New Year's Eve. I've been so blessed in my life and so fortunate and so lucky with the breaks that I've received that at the same time, I want to give back. And I believe that I have, and I want to tell you about that. In the late 90s, I was asked by then Mayor Richard Riordan to go on the board and to become chairman of an organization called LA's Best. I actually consider my time there one of the best things I've ever done. LA's Best was started by Mayor Tom Bradley in 1988. It's an after-school education and enrichment program for the poorest inner-city elementary school students in Los Angeles. During its first 10 years of existence, it was in just a fixed number of schools, 21 schools with 3,000 children, and it was run by a CEO named Carla Sanger.
When I met Jerry Katell, all I knew is that he was not of the same political persuasion that I was. He was charming, but I thought, all right, if this is the guy that the mayor thinks is the guy, this is the guy. And it turned out he was the single most important builder of LA's Best to absolutely ensure our ongoing and future that we ever had.
Mayor Bradley got the Community Redevelopment Agency to fund it, and there was no outside funding. It was just funded by them. At the end of that 10-year period, the Community Redevelopment Agency went to Carla Sanger and said, we're done 10 years. You're not going to see another dollar from us. Carla went to Riordan. He set up a meeting. I get to go to the meeting. I went on the board.
His energy was enormous. I think he probably came in because it was a request of the mayor, not because he had an affinity for the work. But then he went to the sites and he met the staff and he met the kids. And his heart is enormous. And his heart was growing and growing with all the quality of the interactions that he saw between these kids who, remember, had the greatest needs and the fewest resources in the whole city. And he felt we had to grow, but not just with private money. We needed more government money for the organization. And he was keen on the fact we had to reach more students, we had to be in more schools, and he would do whatever it took to help reach those goals.
So what we did is we created a whole new board. We made the original board, whose focus had always been on just on the program. We made that an advisory board who continued to focus on the program, and we brought in a top public relations company, and we started raising money. Also started working with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Before he ran for governor, he had started a similar program in the middle schools to what we were doing in the elementary schools. And he was a big force in getting a proposition passed at the state level to raise money for after-school programs. So during the 9-year period that I served as chairman of LA's Best, we were able to grow it from 3,000 students in 21 schools to 28,000 students in 180 schools every day. The best thing I've ever done. Aside from LA's Best, the other thing that I'm quite proud of being a part of was I was asked to go on the building committee for Walt Disney Concert Hall. When that building opened in 2003, it became not only a cultural masterpiece for Los Angeles, but really for the world. So working on that project was wonderful for me because I always had a love of music. My family was very musically oriented. And so it combined that side of my life as well as the construction side, development side. So it was wonderful to work on during that period of time. For me, the secret of life is just always being open to new things, meeting new people, trying new things, and leaving a positive mark on the world. Now, that could be through nonprofit organizations that you support. It can be through things you create and build. It can be through artwork that you do. You can be through supporting other people to do those same things if you don't do them yourselves. So success to me is leaving a mark in the world, a positive mark.
He's very determined and motivated and focused, and anything he sets his mind to, he accomplishes. It's amazing. It's really amazing.
Jerry Katell puts his heart in everything he does, whatever it is, whether it's acting, producing, supporting nonprofits, He puts his heart in it. And I think there aren't a lot of people who do what they say they're going to do. A lot of people overpromise, a lot of people underdeliver. Jerry Katell isn't one of them. If he says he's going to do it, he does it.
There are two kinds of people. Some people say why, and other people say why not. Jerry goes through has gone through his life, why not? He is fearless. He will try anything, and anything he approaches, it's no trepidation, no hesitation, just, okay.
There is no challenge that's too big for him. And I find in my own life now where I'll be going through some task or something challenging that I don't really want to continue with, and I'll think, what would he do? He would push ahead. And that has made a really neat difference in me. And I wish more people saw that and could sort of discover their own potential through his example.
When I look back at people who have influenced my life, I put Jerry right at the top of the list of I wouldn't be where I'm at today, honestly, if I had not run into Jerry.
I think if you were open to love and willing to love, then you can find love. And you have to want it. It has to be a clear objective of yours, and it always has been for me. And that's why I feel it's the most important thing. And it can be love of another person, love of your children. There's all sorts of love. But all these things, they're all involved with love. I love doing photography. That's a love of mine. So for me, love encompasses just about everything.
I think my dad has a huge heart. I think he really loves the people he loves. And he's very giving, very generous, very loving. And when you're loved by him, you just feel it.
It's very comfortable and easy being around him. That's not true of a lot of people I know who fill up a room with energy and sometimes you're not even sure what's going to happen next. With Jerry, it's just more even, tempered, balanced.
Yeah, I think he's left a legacy in the real estate world to some extent. He was, at one point, he had the most square footage of office space in Los Angeles County. And I mean, I think his legacy is more importantly with us, maybe the children, how he's been a role model. I think that's more important than all the material stuff.
He's a very giving person, a very generous person, and he never trumpets his achievements, he never trumpets his generosity. He just, I guess he considers it part of his nature, and I guess it is. And that's, to me, the most remarkable quality about him.
He's a man of great integrity, and he's self-effacing. So when you meet Jerry, you say, this is a substantive man, but you don't really know the depth of him until you watch him do things. And he's honest, and he's straightforward, he's transparent. So when people meet somebody like him, they trust him.
He's a big dreamer, but he's not a dreamer that doesn't make things happen. He's a dreamer that actualizes his dreams. And I think that that's the neatest thing about him. When he left the East Coast and drove west in his MG and he was going to do this and he was going to be a West Coast man, I mean, he'll tell the story of that, and knowing that he just didn't belong on the East Coast, and then seeing a future for himself in real estate. And, he's just so driven and so determined.
My whole life, I've always been excited about what's next. What's the next adventure? What's coming down the road? Much of which I never anticipated. And I still feel that way. I hope I still have a lot of mileage left in my tank, and who knows what's next and what other wonderful things are out there in my future.
That was great. Now what?